Welcome to Rad Futures. Today I'm going to be talking with Alan Collinge. Alan is the founder of studentloanjustice.org. Created in 2005, this grassroots organization is dedicated to informing the public about predatory underpinnings of both federal and private student loans in the United States. Student loan justice was credited as the inspiration for the Student Borrower Bill of Rights and has broken numerous news items in the press with its research findings regarding conflicts of interest in the student loan system, student debt levels, default rates, corporate lobbying, and other areas. Alan and Student Loan Justice have been featured on 60 Minutes, 2020, The NewsHour, CNBC, and many other television programs. Print media, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Fortune Magazine, the Chronicle of Higher Education, and many others, as well as numerous radio and internet broadcasts. He is the author of The Student Loan Scam on Beacon Press and was selected as one of 7 financial heroes by CNN Money Magazine in December 2008. So welcome, Alan. I am super excited to talk to you today, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Jessica.
Yeah, so right away, I just kind of want to jump right in here to the book that you published. I was kind of checking it out on Amazon. I have not read it because this all kind of happened pretty last minute, but I will. But, you know, I was kind of looking at it. So it's called The Student Loan Scam, the Most Oppressive Debt in U.S. History and How We Can Fight Back, published in 2010. And on the, I think it's the back or in the description of that book, it says that, now this is in 2010 when it was published, when you were writing it, presumably, probably the year or two before that. The figure that you mentioned is 85 billion in student loans.
That's old.
Yeah, right. So, right. So now it's 2022. Many years after you published that book, and the magical figure that's thrown out all the time is 1.7 and or 1.8 trillion dollars, which is obviously a significant amount of money and outweighs, I think it's the credit card debt in the United States by several billion. So tell me about this figure, this $1.8 trillion figure. Do you think it's correct? I was looking on Twitter last night and I saw some sort of comments going back and forth about, well, this may not be a true reflection of the actual debt because of, compounded interest rates being factored in or, not being factored in. So tell me about this magical figure and tell me if you think that it's correct.
Sure, it's a great question. Just for your listeners, that 85 billion number, that's actually the amount that was being lent every year back when I was writing the book. And believe it or not, I wrote that book literally in the weeks before the subprime home mortgage meltdown. So it was even well before 2010. It was like 2007 and 8 is when I wrote it. But still, around, let's say, the turn of the century, around the year 2000, total student loan debt in this country was on a par with 85 billion. It's probably maybe double that, about 150 billion or so. Mm-hmm. But today we are lending $100 billion a year and have been for the past 10 years or so. We shot past, as you rightly mentioned. By the way, I was the guy who broke that story about student loans surpassing credit card debt. I just the guy that broke that in the Wall Street Journal, Mary Pilon.
Excellent.
So the amount of federal student loan books debt on the books right now today, or actually as of I think fourth quarter 2019, was 1.566 trillion. Credit card debt last I checked was like 1.2 or 3 trillion or so. Mm-hmm. So it's actually hundreds of billions of dollars more than credit card debt.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a ton of private student loan debt out there. Some people say it's about 140 billion. I think it's probably maybe a little bit more than that. But also, and this, people never talk about this, there's a lot of debt that people took out to go to college. So legally, it's not called student loan debt. It's not, quote unquote, an educational loan, but it is money that people borrowed for college, and it's sitting in, credit union lending instruments, other private lending instruments. So my best estimate today is that we are well over $2 trillion in
Okay.
actual outstanding college debt, call it student loan debt or college debt. But there's even one more wrinkle to the story. And unfortunately, I can't prove this, but I live and breathe Department of Education data and have been for the past 17 years. I suspect, but cannot prove at this point in time, that there is a lot of interest on defaulted federal student loans that is not being reported by the Department of Education. I knew that as of 2009, I actually even had, probably still have if I could find it, an email from Department of Education saying that they do not include interest that accumulates on a defaulted loan when reporting on the value of their defaulted loan portfolio. So it could well be, if what I just said is true, we could be way, way, way over $2 trillion, because the default portfolio is huge at this point. It's 10, 11, 12, 13 million people. So it could be well greater even still than $2 trillion.
And the interest, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but the interest rate, if you default, goes way up. Yes.
Well, the interest rates actually stays the same.
Oh, it does. Okay.
But there's a what's called a collection rate of, I think it used to be 25%. Now I think it's closer to 16%, where when you pay on a defaulted loan, all that money goes to collection fees first, then gets applied to interest, then gets applied to principal. So a defaulted loan will easily double or triple in just a few years with, these collection fees and this interest.
So let's say hypothetically, one of the 6% of recent medical graduates who doesn't get matched, right? An unmatched sort of medical graduate has 500,000, okay, in student loans. Now they can't find a job. They can't get licensed if they don't get matched. So they're out here working at Burger King to pay rent or something. Now, let's say hypothetically they go into default. So that $500,000 that they owe could potentially become, you're saying, double. Yes.
Easily. Yeah, easily. There's a trick called loan rehabilitation. And by the way, it's the nastiest trick out there in the whole student loan scam universe. So when you have a defaulted loan, a whole bunch of student loan shark people will try very hard to get you to typically pay for 10 months, and none of that goes to your actual loan. It all goes into the pockets of the agent who gets you to do this loan rehabilitation. But at the end of this loan rehabilitation process, you sign for a new, much larger undefaulted loan. Typically, it's probably on average, I'd say it's probably got to be at least double what you originally borrowed. And the agents doing this get a 16% commission, by the way. So, and these defaulted loans, as an aside, they typically default again around 80% of the time. So everybody I talk to who's in default, I'm like, no, do not rehabilitate your loans if you can possibly avoid it. It's a terrible, terrible trick.
Okay.
But yeah, those are the numbers that I see all the time, Jessica.
Mm.
I could go on and on. We've got a borrower that I talked to just the other day. She originally borrowed $26,000. She fell into default. She rehabilitated. I believe she defaulted again, although I'm not sure about that. And this was many years ago. She's in her 50s or 60s. So to date, she has paid back $93,000 on this student loan, $26,000 loan. She still owes, I think it was $132,000 on this
Wow.
$26,000 loan. So only with student loans do you see these types of, I mean, I would almost say cartoonish and nonsensical numbers, but these numbers are very real to the borrowers who are paying this money. I mean,
Right.
that's not a fantasy; it's real money.
Right.
Um, so yeah, student
Yeah.
loans are. I've heard a collection industry writer call student loans the golden unicorn of consumer finance. Uh,
Mm.
because unlike all other loans, student loans are uniquely stripped of bankruptcy protections, which the founders called for uniform bankruptcy laws in the Constitution ahead of the power to declare war and raise
Hmm.
an army, I might add. But they've also been stripped of statutes of limitations.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the 1-2 punch for the stripping of consumer protections with student loans. And again, there's just I don't know if you call it mafia-like. It's probably worse than mafia-like collection regime that stands behind the whole thing. People can
Uh,
have. Go ahead.
what I'm just curious if you can tell people, because a lot of people don't know, what is your background? You have two degrees, yes?
Oh, my own personal. I actually have 3 degrees in aerospace engineering, believe it or not, from the
Uh-huh.
University of Southern California. I was an aeronautical scientist at the California Institute of Technology out of college.
Hmm.
I sort of fell into the student loan universe because my own personal student loan situation, I had been, ironically, I sort of got out of science in my 30s and I found myself working in federal banking, believe it or not. I was running a regional lending program on behalf of the Department of Transportation. And what I saw happen with my own loans, my loans were improperly thrown into default, and all that stuff that I just mentioned happened to me. So,
Okay.
so I am living and breathing this problem. But everything that I learned from doing banking for the government over a few years um, really opened my eyes and made me realize that something had gone horribly, horribly wrong
Hmm.
with the federal student loan system. So I started
Yeah.
doing research, and what I found was just jaw dropping. The corruption, the bribes, the sneaky way that this lending system had been weaponized against the citizens was just too much for me to take. And so I took my research to, first it was Fortune magazine and a really good piece by Bethany McLean, who actually is the reporter who broke the Enron story. She ended up writing, after a year of bothering her, she wrote a really nice story at Fortune magazine. Um, did I say Forbes? I meant Fortune. Anyways,
Okay.
uh, I hate Forbes, by the way. I really don't like Forbes magazine at all these days. So yeah, no, it turned out to be a very wide open field, as they say. So I started student loan justice in 2005, and unfortunately, while I had some great early success winding up, in Fortune and in the top story on 60 Minutes and etc., what started in my own mind as like a 2-year project has become a 17-year um, very long journey, I'll just say.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're still plugging away. I mean, I see you out there on Twitter. So, I mean, you mentioned a couple things. It's interesting. I mean, I'm looking forward to reading your book. But, you mentioned corruption, you mentioned bribes. So there's nefarious kind of activity happening behind the scenes, which you kind of hear allusions to in various sort of social media contexts. And, I think there's a lot of angry borrowers out there who assume things like that, So what is the actual proof here? I mean, what are you saying is actually happening behind the scenes?
Sure. Well, just a couple of examples. It's a pretty cool thing. After the 60 Minutes piece that we were featured in, along with then bankruptcy professor Elizabeth Warren, by the way.
Mhm.
Uh, as a result of that, then Attorney General Eliot Spitzer started an investigation, as did the Senate Help Committee, which culminated in what to date has been the largest scandal in the history of higher education in this country. So we found stuff like, and those two offices I just mentioned found that financial aid administrators across the country were taking kickbacks, bribes. They were taking illegal money from the lending companies in return for putting their sort of stamp on the university financial aid department, having preferred lender status, etc.
Mm.
And yeah, it was kind of a big deal. Financial aid administrators from very hoity-toity colleges like Columbia, like my alma mater, USC, and a couple other schools, University of Texas, they were found to be taking bribes, and they lost their jobs very quickly. Quite frankly, they probably should have been criminally charged.
Yeah.
We
Yes.
also found examples of people at the Department of Education who were taking kickbacks, like stock gifts from the lenders.
Uh-huh.
There was a guy, Matteo Fontana. He actually ran the Office of Financial Partners for the Department of Education. And one of the student loan companies, I believe it was Student Loan Express at the time, had given Matteo $100,000 in, I believe it was stock in their company.
Mhm.
So those are the sorts of behind the scenes shenanigans that we uncovered through the whole adventure. But, it doesn't stop there. The amount of money that members of Congress and their family members like Buck McKeon and Mike Enzi, many other either former or even current members of Congress um, have taken, it's just almost overwhelming. The
Mhm.
amount of money that the banks, most notably Sallie Mae, Navient, but other people as well, have found a way to get into the hands of members of Congress and their families is pretty overwhelming. It's pretty daunting, and it's a tough thing to fight. The student loan problem is way, way, way more resilient. The people in Washington, D.C. have really found a way to build this lending monstrosity into a very formidable opponent, I will say. Um,
Indeed.
they
Indeed.
have worked very hard to sort of massage the zeitgeist, and I would almost accuse them of playing mass psychological tricks on the citizenry
Sure.
in terms of seeding the media with just incredible myths about the student loan problem. And I'd love to
Mhm.
talk about that at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. We can go into that for sure. But you mentioned really quickly, you mentioned the stocks, and I was just looking the other day, and they do. All of these companies, all of these lenders do have securities on the New York Stock Exchange. Navient has Navi. Navi is the ticker that was last trading when I checked at $17.82 per share. Um, NNI, which was at $84.44 per share, and then Sallie Mae, which is still being traded, obviously, at $19.94 per share. The one thing that you don't hear a whole hell of a lot about are slabs, student loan asset-backed securities. And myself and someone else I was talking to recently have been kind of poking around and trying to find more information about slabs, how slabs operate, who trades them, what kind of what part of the puzzle do these things play at the end of the day. So I'm wondering if you might be able to to comment on that.
Yeah, I've looked pretty closely into this issue as well but quite a few years ago. So slabs used to be a very big deal. The huge majority of both federal and private student loans, say 12 or 13 years ago, they were owned by all the companies that you just mentioned: Sallie Mae, Nelnet, Navient didn't exist at the time, but others. And yeah, they were sliced and diced and bundled and sold and on Wall Street, and it was a very, very large market. But I have to be I would say today slabs are not that big of a deal anymore. They are asset-backed securities, so that they are bundled packages of loans,
Okay.
just similarly to how subprime home mortgages were bundled together
Okay.
and
Gotcha.
bought and sold and traded, and all sorts of side bets were made on them through credit default swaps, etc. All the stuff that brought us the home mortgage crisis used to be a very prevalent phenomenon in student loans. But today, not so much, honestly. The federal government essentially took over the lending program in 2010 under President Obama, so that today 90% roughly of all student debt is now owned directly by the Department of Education. So we're only talking about, maybe a couple $100 billion that are out there in private hands, including both private student loans. And we have these legacy FFELP loans, which is maybe 200, a little more, $1 billion. So those are still indeed traded on Wall Street. It's kind of a different market from subprime home mortgages. It's kind of a more shadowy market, usually open only to institutional investors. So private loans, yeah, all day long, they are still sliced and diced and slabbed up, and all those things still occur. But on the federal side, it's a dwindling market, and both of those things, as I said, probably come to maybe 250 billion at the most. So it's not as big of a thing as it has been in the past. Now, full disclosure, I am not an investor. I have $0 of investments in any vehicles whatsoever. But a lot of people ask me, they're like, how can we short this thing? Like, how can we short this market? And what I tell them is that the numbers are so absolutely crazy at this point. We've got 80% of the borrowers either not paying, that's over half, or badly underwater on their loans, so they're either paying, and their loan balances are going up. We have a default rate for 2004 borrowers, which is 40%, which is double the subprime home mortgage default rate. But 2004 borrowers were only borrowing a third of what is being borrowed today. So even before this pandemic, I think we were probably headed for a default rate among all current borrowers of something like 65, 70, 75%. So, I mean, this lending system, there's no other way to put it. It's done. It's failed. It's galactically failed, like no other lending system we've seen, I think, in this country, not certainly in my lifetime.
Well, it's failed, but it's still operating.
Right.
It's still harming people. And
you're absolutely right.
I'm sure financial aid counselors are still taking money. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. I mean, I'm not making any allegations, but I wouldn't be shocked. So, I mean, it has failed. It's failing everybody, actually. And someone that I interviewed recently, Misty Weiscarver, said, if you don't think student loan debt is a problem, you're wrong, because it's affecting everybody. It's affecting everything. So, at $2 trillion, that is like 10% of our entire GDP, which is ridiculous and scary, actually, because like the subprime mortgage crisis, as you mentioned earlier, that bubble popped, and we know what happened with that. The banks, of course, got bailed out. Now that is a little different because in this case, that $2 trillion includes what you're saying. The 2 trillion includes the federal and private loans. Yes.
Yep. Yep.
And that is a bubble that will pop because, I've said this recently to a couple people. The Biden administration likes to, sort of flaunt that this is the best sort of economy in, I don't know what, 40 years, they said something like that, which I don't believe whatsoever. But they're leaving out this whole cadre of people who are the borrowers who haven't been making payments for quite some time. And it's a 45 million people, possibly more, who are affected by this, who we don't even know. We haven't tested that part of the economy yet. We don't know if it's fixed. We don't know if it's broken. We don't know how many of those 45 million people got sick during COVID and died. We don't know if any of them lost their jobs and are struggling, at the moment. So I just feel like there's a crisis, but I feel like it's compounding. It's building, and I don't think most people realize how dire the situation actually is. So what do you think? Do you think I'm blowing this out of proportion? Do you think what's your opinion?
I think you're spot on. I think I may be a little more optimistic than you though. At some point, lending systems fail. I mean, not all lending systems, but we saw it with subprimes. We saw it with the S&L scandal back in the 80s, just in this country. And, from time immemorial, lending systems have failed from time to time. So the good news is that, as I said, even before this pandemic, about 64.3% of all borrowers were not making payments. They just weren't. They were in default, they were in deferment, forbearance, otherwise not paying or delinquent. I think that is going to go to near zero. I mean, right now, as we speak, almost nobody is paying on their student loans. People have had 2 years to think about things and reflect. And I think a lot of people have reached the conclusion that I reached many years ago, which is this lending system is done. It's fake. It's not even real. That $2 trillion is the vast majority of that is interest and fees slapped onto the principal. When more than half of the borrowers aren't paying on a loan, is it really even a loan? Is it even a viable lending system anymore? I don't think so. I think it's illegitimate. And I think people have come to that conclusion. And I don't think this pandemic has been easy on any of the people that I talk to. Like, almost nobody I know has been like, yeah, this pandemic has been good for me. Sure, not having to pay on your student loans over a couple of years has been helpful. But the reality is people are done. If more than half the people were done before the pandemic, way more than half the people are done if and when the Biden administration actually has the, I would say, chutzpah to even try and turn this lending system back on. It's just not going to happen. I would be stunned if even 25% of the borrowers actually resume making payments on their loans.
So hypothetically, let's do a thought experiment, I guess. So let's say 25% start making the payments once the payments are turned back on. The rest of the populace who owes money to the federal government and private institutions stops making payments. Several million people go into default. And then what happens?
Yeah, I think that's the reality. We are absolutely headed for a mass default whenever they decide to try and turn this lending system back on.
Yeah.
This could and should have a good, clean ending. I mean, if the people in Washington, D.C. care at all about the people,
about the country, really.
The country, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They will do the right thing and they will broadly cancel the debt, maybe totally. Quite frankly, I think I think this lending system is so far gone, there's really no good reason to save it. I think
Mhm.
the best, cleanest, most economically stimulative solution is to simply clear the debt and start over again. We need to reinvent how we fund higher education in this country. That's the good, clean death. And it can be done, by the way, without adding even one penny to the national debt, without needing even a nickel from the Treasury.
Yeah.
So unlike PPP loans and the other pandemic stimulus that we've seen over the past few years, you can cancel loans without any negative impact. In fact, with zero impact on the national debt. So there's no easier, cleaner way to stimulate the economy than by simply canceling the loans.
Right.
Um, and so I would like to see that. But I think this really all comes down as a practical matter to bankruptcy. And I know
Mm.
that's not a sexy thing at all. Nobody wants to file for bankruptcy. Nobody wants to think about bankruptcy.
No, and I feel like as helpful, and I say that with reservation, because bankruptcy, everybody knows, once you file bankruptcy, your credit goes to shit, and then you have to spend the next seven years or whatever it is trying to get back on your feet. It makes it so difficult. I mean, borrowers already have such a tough situation, where, if I were personally to go out and try to buy a home, they would look at my student loan debt and they would reject me immediately. Actually, it's happened already. So you're already in a tough situation. Then if 45 million people file bankruptcy, um, I don't know. I don't see that being a good thing either. I don't.
So
Economically.
here's the thing that you need to know about bankruptcy. So the founding fathers called for uniform bankruptcy laws in the Constitution ahead of the power to declare war and raise an army. People like George Washington, John Adams, many others, they were being savaged under debt to British banks and merchants. So it turns out, with benefit of hindsight, that removing bankruptcy from a lending instrument is a terrible, terrible thing to have to do,
Mm.
because not because it enables a predatory lending regime to rise up, like that is vicious and cruel and weaponized, precisely what we see now here today with the federal student loan program.
Yeah.
So the reason that we're fighting for, some would say, the moderate solution of bankruptcy, it isn't so that everybody can run out and file. It's a terrible thing to have to do. Bankruptcy is no picnic. But the founding fathers knew, and the truth is clear, that you've got to have the threat of bankruptcy back on your side as a borrower in order to get any kind of fair treatment. So right now, here today, we see what Joe Biden is all about. He is joined at the hip with the banks. If Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders was in office, maybe it would be a different situation. But the fact of the matter is,
Yes.
Joe Biden
Yes.
is absolutely not going to meaningfully cancel student loans. He's not going to do it in the current environment. The best that we can hope to see from Joe is that he will cancel up to $50,000. And I'm sorry, but that is a joke. That is a trick being played on the people. And I like Elizabeth Warren. She's great. But this $50,000 arbitrary cap is swamp weasel wording. Up to is like a used car salesman's term, right? It could mean anything. And
What we
have seen from the Department of Education over many decades is that if they have any little trick they can play to not cancel loans, that is exactly what they do. The disqualification rate for every student loan repayment program cumulatively going back to the 1990s is over 99%. So these loan cancellation / repayment programs have been a cruel joke. And the one thing that the Department of Education fights for, it's really their kryptonite behind the scenes, is the threat of bankruptcy. And so, unless we get the threat of bankruptcy back on our side, up to $50,000, yeah, it sounds good. But for you, yeah, you get $8,000, you get $3,000. you didn't fill out your form correctly, you get nothing. You're in default, you get nothing. It will come to almost nothing for almost everyone, and absolutely nothing for many. That is the political reality on the ground right now. Now, with the threat of bankruptcy returned to us, the people, as it exists for all other loans, all of a sudden the entire game changes. There's roughly 40 million people in the country who are underwater on their student loans. If we don't see anything meaningful from the Biden administration with bankruptcy returned to the loans, we are looking at a wave of filings larger than anything we've seen in this nation's history, going back to before the Depression. Like in an average year, fewer than 1 million people file for bankruptcy for any reason. So with the threat of bankruptcy return to student loans, the Biden administration is all of a sudden, and the Department of Education, they're all of a sudden looking down the barrel of a wave of filings easily large enough to overwhelm every bankruptcy court in this country to the point of seizure. So at that point, when bankruptcy is finally returned to the loans, everything changes. And they're like, okay, well, the game's over, guys. The jig is up. We foisted this unconstitutional lending system on the people for as long as we could, but yeah, game's over. And Biden will have to broadly, meaningfully cancel student loans. None of this up to $10,000, up to $50,000 means tested.
No, it's not going to do anything for anybody. It's a fucking joke. It's a joke.
It's a total joke. It's a vicious, it's an insulting joke. And you get
tell that, and it's like, tell that to that med student who didn't match. Tell that to that 6% of all of those med graduates who didn't match and have $600,000.
Well, and not only that, the highest balance student loan borrowers, there's a few young doctors and lawyers and other people out there. The highest balance student loan borrowers are people over the age of 35. People over the age of 35 outnumber people under the age of 35 with student loans. People over the age of 50 outnumber people under the age of 25 with student loans. I kid you not. And in both cases, in both cases, it's the older borrowers, those older groups owe double or even triple what the younger group owes. So the people being hurt worse by these loans are these people who've been, it's like that woman I told you earlier. They borrowed $26,000 back in the 80s or 90s.
Yeah.
And now they've got $100,000+ loan balance. Those are the high balance borrowers that, we just took $50,000 off of your $300,000 loan that you originally borrowed like 50 grand on. Congratulations. You now only owe $250,000 on that $50,000 loan.
Right. Yeah. It's like,
it's meaningless.
Right. It's meaningless. It's not going to do anything. It's a joke. It's an insult, actually.
Yes.
It's insulting. And as you said, so the people who are facing retirement, right, because there are a lot of them now who have taken student loans out, who cannot afford to pay them back. And so, we have situations where retirees are collecting their Social Security check and 15% of their SSI is getting garnished, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah, it's disgusting. And what kind of a country does this to its senior citizens? It's appalling.
What kind of a country?
I'm out of adjectives to describe how disgusting this lending system is. But again, the good news, this lending system is dead, Jessica. It's still sort of writhing on the ground. It's in its death throes, but nobody is going to start paying on their loans. We are going to see a mass default. And that's just the reality. There's nothing that anybody can do to make that not true.
Yeah.
The only question is,
I don't think the economy is doing as good as the media is portraying it to be. I just don't.
I don't think that I don't think that student loan borrowers benefited. I don't think they're doing better today than they were 2 years ago.
No.
I think I checked.
I lost my job. That's why I have time to do these interviews.
I think that we made great strides towards the sort of Walmart slash Starbucks economy over this pandemic. We saw all these small businesses close. We saw Walmart did great. Amazon did great. So if you want to drive for Amazon or be a barista at Starbucks, yeah, the job market is great for you. For everyone else, it didn't get better. It just didn't. People I talked to that were working full time before the pandemic, now they're working half time from their homes. Yeah, this pandemic was not good for the economy.
Yeah.
We lost 50 million jobs at 5 million a week in the worst part of the pandemic, and the claim is that the unemployment.
Oh, hello?
Yeah, it hasn't gotten better. It's only gotten worse.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. I can still hear you. Yeah.
You dropped out there.
Oh, okay.
The last minute of what you said is you froze up and dropped out for some reason.
Well, in 10 words, I said that the lending system is dead and the pandemic killed it.
Yeah.
Whether we get a clean death or whether we get a massively painful, socially, probably civilly unrestful unwinding as this lending system has its last fighting lashes out, that remains to be seen. But honestly, probably the biggest mistake President Trump made was not getting rid of this lending system, sort of taking it to the bath and drowning it in the tub. It's the reason he lost the election. The biggest mistake that Biden has made so far in his presidency is betraying us. And no matter what happens, Jessica, the lending system is toast. There's just no saving it. And that's by all rational metrics. So
who gets held accountable for this? Because I feel like you have the lenders, right? You have the lenders. You also have the academic institutions who it was in their interest for this to happen. It was in their interest for there not to be a cap on how much one person could borrow for their education. That leaves a blank check for them. Great. And then we have politicians, right? Like President Biden, who in 2005 voted to take bankruptcy protections away from lenders. So I feel like, as Lisa Ansell said, we're living in a very extraordinary time, because here we have a president who has been given the opportunity by the universe to right some of the past wrongs that he made. The question is he going to do it? And as I've said several times, knowing what I know about his character, I don't think so. But I hope so.
Yeah, Joe Biden, this is the perfect character test and it goes back well before 2005, by the way.
Oh, God.
He was a surprisingly key senator on the Judiciary Committee as a junior senator in 1976. Mm-hmm. Like, I was 6 years old. You probably weren't even born, but when they initially started monkeying around with the bankruptcy laws uniquely for student loans, Joe Biden was a key guy, a surprisingly key guy on that initial legislation. So if ever there was a karmically more appropriate guy to have in the presidency, I think it would be Joe Biden. I hope he does the right thing.
I do too.
I have to side with you. I have to agree with you, Jessica. Up to this point, there is absolutely nothing to indicate that he is going to make this right.
Nothing.
Now, with the threat of bankruptcy back on our side, again, I think everything changes. In fact, I think with the threat of bankruptcy back, they kind of have to end the lending system. I mean, there's no good reason. If I were a congressman, I'd be like, okay, all these loans are not even collectible, yet you're going to keep throwing $100 billion out to the colleges? No. Oh, and by the way, yeah, there's the fingers point in many directions. Joe Biden, obviously, but the colleges, the lenders, many think tanks in Washington, D.C., like, on and on and on. I don't even want to get started on that, but there's many fingers to point. But the strongest finger we have to point as far as who deserves to be held accountable, it's the Department of Education and Congress. That is something that the people supposedly still control. And this goes right up to the Secretary of Education's chair. Unfortunately, he doesn't know a damn thing about student loans. Probably a good guy, Cardona. He knew zero coming into this job about the student loan problem. He was more of a K through 12 guy. I think the student loan swamp really liked him because he'll do basically whatever the unappointed bureaucrats within and around the Department of Education tell him to do.
Yeah.
But it really is the swamp that we're up against here. And the Department of Education is supposed to be looking out for the citizens. And quite frankly, in their defense, I don't think even they know what to do. This lending system is so catastrophically failed. Yeah. They know that whenever they try and turn on this rigor mortis at this point lending program, it's not going to happen. They know what I know, and what I know is what I just told you. And so I hope they make the right decision. I hope they see this. I like to say Joe Biden can spend the next 3 years pretending that this lending system is viable. And
I foresee a shit show coming, but I'm not, you know what? I'm going to stay positive. I'm staying positive.
Well, I hope they take the longer view, because they can spend the next 3 years pretending, or if they're very lucky and they cancel loans, that maybe they'll get a chance to spend the next 7 years reinventing this and replacing this failed lending program.
They might have a chance in 2024 too, because if they don't do anything, they're definitely not going to stay. Yeah. And I know a lot of people who feel that way. So
if they don't do something very major before the midterms, the Democrats are going to lose. No way in hell Biden's going to win the next presidential election if he does nothing on student loans. Absolutely no way.
Nope. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Yeah. Let's reconnect maybe after some time and see what happens, and then we can talk again.
Yeah, things are happening fast, so I'm sure we'll probably talk again before too long.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye. All right. Well, that was Rad Futures 7 with Alan Collinge. Thanks for joining me. Make sure you head over to my Twitter at Rad Futures. I'm on Patreon at Rad Futures. And you can also email me if you know of someone that you think I should talk to, or send suggestions, or just want to, I don't know, whatever. You can email me radfuturesnow@gmail.com. Cool. Thank you. See you again next time.